once we start talking, people will come in, I'm sure. But in order to keep on schedule, let me introduce our next speaker, who is Marvin Mills, an architect, architectural historian, and professor of history of architecture. And again, we had some fascinating conversations around the dinner table last night, and I think you're going to like what he has to say. Now, he's in the toughest spot here right after lunch because we're all getting a little sleepy, so just do your best because it's good stuff. Please welcome Marvin Mills.
Hello, everybody. I'm speaking on the Mosque of Cordoba. This may sound like an esoteric subject for this gathering, but I believe what I'll be able to do today is to extend our inquiry into alternative knowledge into a whole area that perhaps you have not considered at this point: Islamic architecture. It is not exactly what it seems to be. And this I've come to the conclusion after maybe decades of study of the subject. The Mosque of Cordoba is supposed to have been built in 785 AD. My contention is that what's there is not originally a mosque, but it was originally built by the Phoenicians way back in something like 800 BC. I will also be talking about, to some extent, the Taj Mahal in India, which you all must believe is a great Muslim Mughal building, built in 1638 AD by Shah Jahan, and that too is not originally a Muslim building. And I shall show that there are many other buildings in the world that are allegedly Muslim, but are not. And so we have to reshape our ideas about this whole area. So what is the Mosque of Cordoba? We're talking about Cordoba, Spain, and we're talking about Andalusia, the southern part of Spain. And here is the mosque, looked at from the air. This here is the Guadalquivir River, which goes down to Cadiz in the Atlantic. Here's the ancient Roman bridge that crosses the Guadalquivir. Here is an ancient castle, and here is a Roman triumphal arch. This is the minaret, this is the courtyard, and this is the prayer hall. So that'll give you some idea of what we're talking about. One of the a mosque is not as complicated, essentially, to design as, say, a cathedral. A mosque has a very few essential characteristics. Its first essential, you can imagine, is that it face Mecca. If anyone builds a mosque today, or if anyone examines a mosque monument from years ago, they will assume that it faces Mecca, no matter which country in the world it's built. The question we ask right here is, where does this mosque face? And strangely enough, it does not face Mecca. It faces some 50 degrees or so away from Mecca. Mecca is off to the east in this part in Spain, and this building actually is facing southerly. So that should be the number one cause of suspicion. If you see a building in the world that's called an ancient Muslim monument and it does not face Mecca, you have cause to consider that maybe it is really an older building. The other heresy that I want to introduce, after having mentioned this about Islamic architecture, is the whole question of that period in Spain, which is called the convivencia, the living together of the three great religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And this is supposed to have taken place at its height in the 10th century, but in generally the 8th to 10th century in Spain. And it's supposed to be a period when Muslim civilization proved itself capable of great cultural advances and of great tolerance towards other religions, which enabled them, like in this country, to bring together disparate groups and create a great cultural advance. This is also a myth. The actual fact is that the Muslims, from the time of Muhammad in the 7th century AD until the present, have been driven in their international relations by jihad, that is, war against the infidel. They divide the world into the world of peace, where the Islamic nations exist, and the world of war, which is everybody else, and everybody else is an infidel. So in Spain, what they actually did is not get along peacefully, but actually imposed what they call the jizya, the tax on all peoples not Islamic, and were actually persecuted them rather than tolerated them. And in this atmosphere of not convivencia but of antagonism, there was not great progress made, and that those few exceptions that we've heard about Jews and Christians being advanced in the world of culture and in politics are exceptions to the rule. This is Maimonides, a great Jewish philosopher, a statue in Cordoba that you can see if you go there. And what he says about the situation is that God has hurled us in the midst of this people who have persecuted us severely and passed baneful and discriminatory legislation against us. Never did a nation molest, degrade, debate, and hate us as much as they, etc., etc. That's Maimonides, and that's pretty much the picture of what was going on there. So this idea that somehow this great building, which it is, this Mosque of Cordoba, came into being with the aid of the great creativity of the Muslim people without precedent, but they spun it out of their mind, doesn't sound plausible to me. And so, I'm the only person in the world, I believe up to this point, who has carbon dated the Mosque of Cordoba. That is, there's a way of examining wood, as you know, in order to determine the age of the wood and therefore the age of the building. And I made 5 different samples, and this was already 30 years ago. And what I want to show, these are the samples ranging from here, there's 1000 BC up to 1500 AD. This is the stages of the Mosque of Cordoba, 786 AD to 1007 AD. But the key sample here is the one I got from the roof of the Mosque of Cordoba, which dated to 810 BC. Now, admittedly, there are problems with carbon-14 dating, and there's a problem in making any claims about a single sample. But still, 810 BC is the time of the Phoenician era. It is not the time, it's 1,500 years earlier than the Muslim era. What in the world is this beam doing up there in the ceiling of the Mosque of Cordoba? Even though I've published this, it has never been brought to light by any scholars. It is never mentioned, it is never cited, it is never replicated. And this tells us something about the nature of historiography, of scholarly research in this country and in the world. The other building I want to talk about to some extent is the Taj Mahal, which you see here, which you're all quite familiar with. I also am the only person in the world who carbon-14 dated the Taj Mahal. And this is the result of it, and the date that comes out is written here. The midpoint of the date, I think it's like 1350, some 250 or 300 years earlier than the 1638 that the Taj Mahal is said to have been built. So my contention is that this greatest of all Muslim buildings is also, like the Mosque of Cordoba, not Muslim, that it is in fact in India a Hindu building. And where did I get this from? This is the back of the Taj Mahal, and this is along the Jumna River, and here's at the level of the river, and this is a doorway that we have here leading to a bunch of rooms underneath the Taj, and in this doorway I was able to acquire a sample of wood, and that's the sample that gave me, and here's the man that got the sample for me, and there's the wood door, and he's a guide, and he got the sample, and that piece of evidence has also never been cited in the literature and is never meant to be tried to be duplicated. The problem is when you're dealing with a subject in history that's not even reached the level of being contested, let alone believed, but not even contested, no scholar will seriously introduce your findings, not let alone your opinion, your findings even, into their own work. The attitude is, my point of view, craven, absolutely craven. And I know that people that here who are interested in alternative history, alternative knowledge, are sympathetic. So this is my book that I put out, The Origin of the Mosque of Cordoba, which I understand, I'm amazed it's already sold out, but you can order it at Amazon for something like $12 or Barnes & Noble, and you can get a copy of it. And here you see various scenes of the interior of the Mosque of Cordoba. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, as is the Taj Mahal. Its beauty is mostly in its interior, the splendid kaleidoscope of arches that you see here, and columns and arches, maybe 1,000 of them, over a huge area, so that no picture does it justice. When you're in there and you're walking around and these columns change position and the arches change position, it's an extremely striking space, whoever built it. And this, what you see here, two levels of arches. This is the bottom level, which is a horseshoe-shaped arch, and above it there's a semicircular arch that goes up to the ceiling. This also is unprecedented in any architectural development up to that point, including, of course, Islam. So one must ask, how did these things get it? Where is the precedent? In the history of architecture, there's always some precedent, some gradual development. Things do not appear generally on the scene de novo without some background to it. So how did this come about? And I made an inquiry in my book. I asked, well, who built it? Which people could have built it if it wasn't Islam? And I came to the conclusion there's only one place, as bizarre as it sounds, it goes back as far as the Phoenicians. But when I asked about the Phoenicians, I realized from what I had studied about them that they too, there's no record that they ever built anything like this either, although they were great builders at the time. So my next conclusion was they had to have taught, somebody had to have taught them this. And the conclusion I come to, and my theory is that it was the Tartessians, the people from Atlantis who arrived from the mid-Atlantic and settled in Spain, collaborated with the Phoenicians, and together they worked and produced in time the knowledge that they introduced, not them, but the knowledge they introduced was used by the Phoenicians in building this. And this is what the building looks like in plan. It's a rectangular shape, basically, although not perfectly rectangular. Here's the minaret. Here's the main entrance. There's the courtyard. Here's the prayer area. Here's the mihrab, the sacred central place. And here, this mishmash here, is a cathedral. And in the 16th century, after the Reconquista, which occurred in the 13th century, they smashed a cathedral in the 16th century right through the middle of the mosque, up through the roof, and it's now being used since the Muslims have been expelled from Spain, as were the Jews in 1492. It has been used as a cathedral. And so there's this whole area, this whole construct is a museum cathedral type of complex. And these are the way that mosque was built in stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. This is not true either. This is how it was allegedly built. Now, as an architect, I could tell you that everything that's built is built with a function in a broad sense. Nothing is built just without some symbolism or practical function. And that if in the third stage you have a mosque like this, it's very peculiar, because there are no mosques in the world that are built like that are long and narrow. They can't be, because they don't function that way. That the mass of the believers are spread around the mihrab, where the imam gives his address. And to have people all the way back here in a long, skinny configuration is not done in the Islamic world. So this shape is very suspect. Here's how the Phoenicians, some believe by the 1200 BC, coming out of what is now Lebanon over here, dominated the Mediterranean, went through the Straits of Gibraltar, settled Cadiz over here, put settlements along the southern coast here, and set up settlements all over the Mediterranean. And here are the various settlements that you see here. So my contention is this, that it's not on the map here, but that they also settled Cordoba, they also settled Granada, the Alhambra, and they also settled near Cordoba a palace type of city called Medina Azahara, which if I have time I'll show you. So here's a blow-up of those little towns along here, and here is Cordoba, up here, and here is Granada here. And my contention is that Granada was used to protect these settlements. Cordoba was the furthest point up in the Guadalquivir where they can get metals from Spain, which is what brought the Phoenicians there in the first place. The country was rich in gold and silver and tin, and it would load it up in boats, not in the Mosque of Cordoba, but in the warehouse of the Phoenicians. And the materials would come down, they'd come down to the Atlantic, go back into the Mediterranean, and bring these goods principally to Assyria, which was the big dominant nation at the time, and that would be tribute. And here, by 800 AD, is a picture showing the extent of Islam. As you could see, they came out of Saudi Arabia with their jihad, warfare, and took over these countries, this is not quite accurate because they took up only southern Spain and proceeded to dominate up to that point by that time. This is not a good picture of the interior because the colors are bad, but this will give you some idea of the type of thing that's going on inside the Mosque of Cordoba, the prayer hall. The exterior, you see, is quite different. The exterior, it looks like a fortress, and these are piers here. This is the southeast corner, southwest corner. These are crenellations up on top, and these are doorways going in. This is a Phoenician city, which is decoration of an Assyrian tablet showing that the Phoenicians could build. They were the main builders at that time, and they were used, as a matter of fact, to build the Solomon's Temple. And this will give you an idea of what their buildings looked like. So here again are these piers, crenellations, and doorways. So they were quite capable of building the exterior and designing the exterior of the Mosque of Cordoba. It's the interior that gives me, and some parts of the exterior, that leads me to believe they needed Tartessian or Atlantean advice. On the exterior, this is an example of me, not me, my wife here, who's helping me with the ladder, which we got. This was all about, with the help of the Spanish government, who didn't know what I was really up to at this time. And what I was trying to do, you see, is get up to this point here, because these, what they call voussoirs in this arch, are made of, these red ones are made of brick. And brick, like wood, can be dated by thermoluminescence. And my plan was to get brick samples and bring them back to England to get them dated at Oxford, which I did. But unfortunately, while wood can be dated almost every time, it's not true of brick. Brick has to lend itself chemically to it, and so that was not suitable for dating, which is unfortunate. But a good try. And here is this is Cordoba, ancient Cordoba, and this is the mosque here. And notice how this strange shape that it takes a break here at this point. This is the early Phoenician, I believe the early Phoenician Cordoba, and that the reason it breaks is because Rome, which occupied like for 500 years in Spain, they made their site plans east, west, north, and south. And so they laid it out evenly. But so the whole thing took a turn this way, and they put this wall around the whole city. And they built the bridge, what I showed you before. This is the mosque looking down from above at the roof. See, these are the roof coverings. Here's the cathedral, which is smashing its way up through the center of the prayer hall. And this is the garden entry. This is the open area in front. And from the tower, this is the looking at the cathedral and looking at the entryways. And here's the Roman bridge looking across at the mosque. Here's the interior of the 16th century cathedral inside, which in its own right is not bad, but is what not to do to an existing monument is a prime example. And looking down from the roof at the street below, you can see that the whole mosque is embedded in the city of Cordoba with its little medieval streets. The odd part about the location of the mosque is that instead of being in the middle of the city, which would be advantageous because people could get to it from every direction, and also the call to prayer would be able to reach more people from the top of the minaret. Instead, it's down by the river, which is very suitable for a warehouse since everything from the goods could be loaded up by the river, but not good for as a location. So site is very important as far as property goes, but they didn't seem to be used here as a good guide. Here's another scene on the inside. Now here are your two levels of arches. This level here holds up the roof, and it's semicircular. This level of arch here, this is all stone, is made up of, is horseshoe shaped. That is, it's circular, but pinched at the bottom, like that. And these are what they call voussoirs, or pie-shaped alternating brick and stone. So it's a marvelous way to solve the problem of two things, of raising the ceiling high beyond the level of the columns, and also of bracing the columns, which is what the horseshoe arch does. The most fantastic thing on the interior is this treatment of the arches above the columns at the area around the mihrab. They're called the maksura. That is the area is the most privileged area for royalty and for around the sacred area, which is here, the mihrab. But this interlacing of cusped arches is spectacular and has nowhere appeared in the world in 785. So where in the world did this come from? Who could have done it? And of course, what the scholars say, oh, well, these people were so creative that they spun it out of their heads. I doubt if that's the way it happened. So it must be ancient, and I would say going back to the Tartessian. And in front of the mihrab, looking up, is the cupola, one of the most famous cupolas in the world, with its vaulting, leaping ribs, you see, here, and everything in tile and color, and playful and gorgeous. So when you look up, there's nothing quite like it anywhere. Now here's a better look at the very top. Now here is the mihrab, which you may be familiar with this term. That's the center where everyone faces, and the mihrab has to be oriented towards Mecca. Now what's peculiar about this mihrab is that, again, mihrabs are not rooms. This is a little room, you see. This is a little room. It's about 7 feet. It's an octagonal room, about 7 feet wide. And that in the Islamic world, all mihrabs are niches. There's not a place where you go into. There's not a place where you put an idol. There are no idols. It's simply a place that marks the presence of the sacred. But this is a room. So why would there be a room there? Who would do such a thing? My contention is that this room is a room not for Islam, originally a room for Melkart. Melkart, the Phoenician god of commerce, who could have been set up in here. And that these columns here are imitation, or not imitation, are following the precedent of columns that we believe were used in front of the Temple of Solomon in the 10th century BC in what is now Israel. And here is the mihrab, and it's a reflected ceiling plan. So you're looking up at the ceiling of that mihrab here, which I just showed you. And notice it's a scalloped shell. Nowhere in Islam is there such a decoration. And the scalloped shell, I have a theory, it relates to one of the attributes of Vishnu, the great Hindu god. And that somehow, via the Phoenicians or in some other way, found its way to Spain and was used by the Phoenicians as in the ceiling. Just a theory, and I have to follow it up. And here it is inside the mihrab. There you can see the scalloped shell here. Here you have lobed arches, alternating voussoirs. And this is also in the interior. Beautiful decorative marble panel. And here is Melkart, god of commerce. There's another thing I want to mention. What was found in the 1920s, a statue, which was called La Dama de Elche, because Elche is a city in Andalusia, and it's about 2 feet high, and it's a very strange thing to find in Spain, because it doesn't relate to anything that they've seen before from any period, anything Spanish or anything else. And that there are other statues like this with the same appearance, so it's not the only one. But notice these strange things around her ears, the facial look about it. It was immediately, a book was written declaring it a forgery. But still, in my view, it's not a forgery. And that what this is looking at remains from the Tartessian Atlantean period and is not 5th century BC, but earlier. And here's another view of La Dama de Elche, a mysterious thing. And if it is a forgery, it's pretty good in its own right. Let me move on. These are, this type of horseshoe arch here, it was known in Spain and is used in Christian churches before the Muslim period. So it's not new to Spain in the Islamic period. But here it is in the original minaret, original tower, I should say. Here we are again. And here is this tower, this minaret is very strange in that there is an original tower within the Renaissance jacket or cover of the minaret. In other words, this was built in the 16th century, but inside it is the original tower. Now this tower goes up like 70 meters. If it were the original one did. Right now it was converted because it's a bell tower and it calls to prayer the Christian faithful. But the tower on the inside went up 70 meters, and the way the Muslims call to prayer is by voice, as you know. And voice from 70 meters isn't going to be heard well, actually the call is from 60 meters because they didn't call from the very top. But from 180 feet up in the air or more, you're not going to hear very much in the city below. So it's extremely, from an architectural point of view, a wrong thing to do in making a tower. And here is the Renaissance tower. And here's the original tower. Now, what's interesting, too, about that minaret is it has steps going up it to take you to the top. There's a view of it, of the original, taken from inside. There's a way of taking a little picture of it. But there's a plan of the stairs. Two sets of stairs, one here and one here. Those stairs, how many steps do they have? 108, according to the literature. So what? 108. In the ancient times, things were not designed haphazardly or subjectively. Everything had a symbolic meaning or expression. 108 has significance, I'm sure, to you folks, because it has to do with the precession of the equinoxes. As you know, well, let me go back. As you know, the way it works is that in the precession of the equinoxes, the sun migrates every 72 years. It migrates 1 degree around the 360 degrees in the heavens, going from the 12 constellations. And it does that in 72 years. 72 plus half of it, 36, gives 108. Everywhere in the ancient world, 108 keeps reappearing. So if you go to a place like Angkor Thom in Cambodia, and there are 5 causeways that go across the moat into Angkor Thom. On each side of each of these causeways are 54 statues, 108 on each. And on it goes. Wherever in the ancient world 108 is known by the ancient world. there was one civilization that we call Atlantis, and they all knew that this number was significant. And why are there two stairways? Nowhere in the literature does it tell us why Islam would need two stairways going up. But my own theory is that there are different functions for this original tower. That the tower was both a signal tower for the ships coming up the Guadalquivir, and it was also a fire was used there. It was used as an observatory of the heavens. So I think it had these two basic functions, and that they had a wall between them, which separated them. I don't know of any other explanation of why this would be. And within the wall of the old minaret is this wood frame, about 3 of them at different levels going all the way up. What was it there for? It's like reinforcing bars in steel construction. It was meant to reinforce the masonry construction. And here's one of them sticking out. And here's my helper who cut off a piece, you see, of one of these frames for me, which I had carbon dated, and it came out to be, I had hoped it would be Phoenician, but I have to tell you frankly, it wasn't. But it came out to be something earlier than the 785 AD that's attributed to the mosque, or even in the 900s when the minaret was built. So that's to be, my explanation for that is that the whole Mosque of Cordoba is going through a life cycle of different things happening to it over the centuries. And so that it's rebuilt, damaged, it has earthquakes, and things are rebuilt. Nobody has ever tried to duplicate the dating such as I've done. And here's another view of the exterior. So magnificent entryways, you see. With up here, you see the same archways, blind arches in this case, and here's their entryway here. And here's a close-up of one of the views. And here's one of the grills, which are windows, ventilation, interlacing of stone so that it looks like it's fabric. As an architect, I can tell you that if you go through building something in stages, you generally have a joint between stages because something has to stop and something new has to begin, and you have to have not these, so that if you look where one stage begins and one ends, this is one place, one pier, where there should be one pier ending here, one pier beginning here. So I put a little chalkboard to mark it and took a picture. There's supposed to be a joint here. There's no joint. Now, to me, this is a mystery. These are the exposed stones, and between them there should be a joint, and there is not. And I can't explain it other than to say there were no phases. The whole thing was built at once. So that whole story is a myth. There's another problem. There's supposed to be 23 original gargoyles, see, around the roof of the mosque. But mosques don't have gargoyles. Mosques don't have any living representation, certainly no human representation, because sacred buildings in Islam do not. So how come there are 3 of these 23 left up there? Where are they from? Well, they said, well, they were introduced by the Christians when they came back and took over in the 11th century. They came back and took over the mosque and put up the gargoyle. My problem with that is, to me, the gargoyles look integral to the building. They don't look like they were stuck on. They look like they are there normally. And here's another gargoyle. I'll have to move a little quicker than I. So anyway, my imaginative reconstruction of this whole thing is that this is the way the Phoenicians built this thing. The wall was all around. The first 3 stages were this way, and this was a courtyard where they brought their goods. I felt that so many buildings in the ancient world were used for astronomical purposes that I got in touch with a person I knew, Gerald Hawkins. Who is Gerald Hawkins? He's the man that wrote Stonehenge Decoded. And I went to see him in Washington, and I asked him, does this building have astronomical significance? He said, well, I'll run it through my computers, and I'll tell you. And so he did. And so it was. And so this building has astronomical significance. And what is it? Along this wall, on the midsummer sunrise solstice, you will find that you could sight the sun setting along this wall. So nobody has ever bothered to investigate whether the building had astronomical significance because the Muslims didn't introduce that into their buildings. I also read and studied the Kaaba in Mecca. And the Kaaba in Mecca also has astronomical significance. And it too is tipped, you see, at 30 degrees, the same way the Mosque of Cordoba is tipped to the equator, to the east. And it too has astronomical significance, in this case, to the moon. So that every 19 years, the moon is sighted over the black stone of the Kaaba here. And so here they are together. 30 degrees, this is the Kaaba, this is the Mosque of Cordoba, both tipped at 30 degrees, one to the sun, one to the moon, but they are not. This Mosque of Cordoba is supposed to be facing the Kaaba. Instead, it's parallel to it. Why is the Mosque of Cordoba parallel to the Kaaba, apparently? And my answer is there is some respect in showing this building. What that is, I don't know, but it remains to be investigated. I went up into the roof, and this is where what you can see here is a drill hole, you see, in the beam. Painted beams here. And this is where I got my sample, which gave me the 800 BC date. Now, this is me at a younger age. What am I doing? I'm on a ladder. Where am I going? I'm going down through the floor of the prayer hall. Why am I going down through the floor? In a mosque, there are no basements. In this mosque, there is a lot of basement. And I went down into the basement to investigate it. And this is part of the lower level. So why does the mosque have a lower level if it's a mosque? What's it doing there? No explanation by the authorities, by the scholars. So I want to go through that quickly. At any rate, I tie this whole thing together with the big moments, the big issues in the history of the ancient world. And of course, one of them is the chief one is the Sphinx and the question of when the Sphinx was built. Was it built in 2500 BC or was it built 9600 BC? And my point is that this type of evidence, plus evidence from the maps and evidence of crustal displacement, all point to the fact that we're on the right track, folks. There was an earlier high civilization, and that high civilization did affect the building we now call the Mosque of Cordoba. And that the theory that the Schock and West and others about the erosion of the Sphinx by water is true, and that therefore it had to be before 4000 BC because the area dried up at that time, and therefore it is much older than is commonly believed. There's another place I want you to be familiar with, Fatehpur Sikri. It's a city near Agra, and it's near the Taj Mahal. And here's a plan of this whole city, supposed to have been built by a man called Akbar, the great Mughal. All of which is another fabrication by the Islamic architecture industry that grind out these myths, which are repeated over and over. And the man that started to uncover these myths is a man named Oak, who is a great man in the history of architecture, O-A-K, who died. And these are my friends, and this is me. And where we are in Fatehpur Sikri. Fatehpur Sikri was not built by Akbar. It was found by Akbar. Here's Oak. This is his book, The Taj Mahal is a Hindu Palace, which I recommend highly. You won't be able to get so easily. And this is Shah Jahan, to get back to the Taj Mahal. This nice man holding a little thing in his hand is a killer. And if you blog Taj Mahal and Google it, you'll find people endlessly saying it's a monument to love. That's what it is. He loved this woman, Shah Jahan, Mumtaz Mahal, and that he built this palace for her. All nonsense, complete nonsense. And this is what Oak has to say about that situation. Ascribing the Taj to Shah Jahan amounts to crediting him with Romeo-like constancy and love to Mumtaz and the soft heart of an artist. Far from that, Shah Jahan was a hard-hearted, haughty, conceited, bigoted, stingy, fanatical tyrant. His lechery and utter concern for his wife's health or well-being was responsible for running her to earth by inflicting on her 14 deliveries in 18 years, resulting in her premature death. That's it. So much for the great love affair between Shah Jahan and Mumtaz. And here is again, the Taj Mahal. There it is. That's what we're familiar with. It's a huge, I have to wind it up. So there's much more I could say, but again here, this is the mosque. This is the main building, and the mosque also, like my Mosque of Cordoba, does not face Mecca and makes one suspicious that it is indeed a mosque. So anyway, there are many other buildings I could get to if I had 3 hours to expound on this. But I'll leave it here, and I want to thank you for listening, and I hope I've introduced some new ideas into this discussion. Thank you.